I don't want to forget anybody. Okay. How we doing?
Good.
We're doing all right? We're living during disruptive and disorienting times. We as a nation and as Americans are experiencing a racial reckoning. Gender and sexuality are being constantly renegotiated and better understood. The Me Too movement continues to demonstrate the differences in lived experiences of women. As Americans, it feels we are as divided on politics, culture, and beliefs as we ever have been. Perhaps it's simply that now we know we always have been that divided. I think we're still coming to terms with a world that has the internet, which wields a power that has infinite potential for harm. And all of this is on top of a global pandemic. And this is not what my sermon is about, but I want us to acknowledge the truth and affirm that it's difficult living in 2021. We don't give these societal issues swirling around our head like white noise the credence they deserve. And I've spent a lot of time in previous years speaking about those big issues, what we need to do, what we need to learn, and what we need to do to change our perspective. These are the issues that justifiably fill the headlines and animate the conversations around our dinner tables. If we are to solve them, we need to talk about them, the thinking goes. And that's obviously true. We must be able to turn to our tradition, to our community, to help us think through how we can change the world. But I also think that we like talking about those big issues. We like spending our energy over there because it's easier to focus on that big stuff than the little stuff in our lives. It's easier when we can see ourselves as a cog in a machine than the person behind the wheel. So I want to turn to something smaller, more personal to each of us. Today is Yom Kippur, a day of affliction. But the word Kippur literally means to humble oneself. We spend a lot of time and energy thinking about or even congratulating ourselves on the afflicting that we do today. But what about the humility? The first thing that I want the Kippur of the day to do for us is to recognize what a difficult time we're living through. And then that humility, if it is sincere, should lead us to making more thoughtful choices, the kind that Yom Kippur cares about. So what are those choices? Life is full of choices, and it's the small ones that are often the most difficult to make. The big decisions are easier because they appear less frequently, with less noise surrounding them, allowing the right choice to more easily reveal itself. But it's the day in and day out decisions that are actually most difficult because we're the only ones that can answer them. And yet, since they seem small, less risk in choosing poorly, we offer them less mental and emotional space, which creates this continuous loop of poor choices that yield a half-hearted shrug and a sigh. You know, it'll work itself out. And when I thought about these kinds of choices, I thought about this old comedy routine by Jack Benny. He had this routine based upon his comedic persona of being a frugal man. He's out for a walk at night, and a man approaches him, holds out a gun, and says, "Your money or your life?" Benny does not respond. The thief is confused but frustrated and says, "Did you hear me? I said your money or your life." Benny responds, "I'm thinking it over." The point is that obviously some choices are made for us and others have a clear right path. There's right and wrong, live or die. And those choices are more aligned with the global or meta issues that I opened with, the ones we think require or demand greater care when contemplating our options, and therein lies our mistake. When we reflect back on our lives, or when we're shown the real of our life as our tradition imagines upon our death, these decisions, day-to-day choices, are anything but mundane. These are not the ones where a poor choice will lead to death. There was no gun pointed at our head, but they are the ones that chip away at life, at being fully alive. You're having dinner with family or talking with a friend and your pocket buzzes. Sorry, I have to take this. Give me a minute, I have to read this. I'll make it better tomorrow. Do we ever stop long enough to provide ourselves with a choice? To ask ourselves, do we need to take it? Do we have to? Will your client lose their case if you call them back later? Will it not get published? Will you lose your job if you write that email in an hour, in a day? The answer is no. And if the answer is yes, then we have far more significant problems than these. We're here today because we believe, or we want to believe, that God forgives. At least that's what our liturgy is telling us. But how many I have to's before your partner, your child, or friend no longer feels they have to forgive? How many I have to's? How many distracted responses or misconnections can we reasonably expect a loved one to pardon us from? And perhaps more importantly, if we are to truly size ourselves up and do the cheshbon nefesh, the accounting of our soul that our tradition is asking us to do, can we forgive ourselves? How gracious can we be in forgiving the times we confuse the important with the essential? We're here tonight not only to think about the big mistakes, the real damage we've caused, but also when we miss the mark, when our actions could be excused or overlooked. You know, the times that we consciously fail, in part because we expect it to be forgiven or forgotten. And I think, again, if we're being honest, many of us live our lives thinking that if our big actions are good, then we'll be excused for all the little hurts and pain and mistakes we make. As we heard earlier, perhaps the most significant claim our liturgy makes is that Yom Kippur atones for the sins between God and us. By coming today, for better or for worse, God has forgiven us. But our liturgy says that Yom Kippur does not atone for the sins between us. We all have to make a choice that requires far more than buying a ticket, opening up a book, and sitting here for a few hours for our loved ones to forgive us. Change does not happen simply by sitting here. It's not clockwork. The high holidays are not solely about self-improvement, and they're not a vehicle or a religious manifestation of the self-help field. This is the new year. Yet when the shofar blows, we're not supposed to be shaken into making the New Year's resolution to exercise more. That's weak tea. We're here to contemplate our morality and our mortality. And we can only do this in the context of our community and in the context of the Beit Din that we established here earlier, of the legal court that was convened. We're holding each other accountable for our silent vows, the kind that Yom Kippur will not undo. As I prepared for the high holidays this year, and I look back on 7 years of high holiday sermons, 7 years of grappling with our tradition's big ideas, there was one that I know that I got wrong, and probably many more. But one year I gave a Rosh Hashanah sermon about how doing tshuva, the process of repenting, was signaling that we can change who we are. I felt this seasonal process of introspection, inspiring repentance, was telling us that we can overhaul the parts of ourselves that we do not like, that we can perform spiritual cosmetic surgery. But I no longer feel that way about change. I see it in myself and I see it in you. That kind of change is elusive. And I think that's mistaking the real gift of tshuva. We're not here tonight to end decades of not speaking to each other, the scar tissue we caused, nor the shame we hold on to for all of those decades of not forgiving. Our task is and must be much smaller. It is important that that notion is out there, that we can change the big things that cause us problems, the things that we don't like about ourselves. That's the shiny marquee of Yom Kippur. This is your annual invitation to change. In a very real way, the liturgy is asking us to suspend disbelief, and that's powerful. Liturgy should transform us, just like when we see a great movie or hear a beautiful concert. But in the end, when we walk out of this room, the work needs to be smaller, and the vision of ourselves will not be as grand or teeming with possibility. Maybe tshuva is only here to give us the space, the emotional wherewithal to recognize our shortcomings and pivot towards what we can change. The patterns of behaviors, the impulses and tics that when seen in isolation feel small, not so important. Yet look inside your books. When we strike our chest, most of the time it's not for betrayal or violence or being zealous for bad causes. Rather, we strike our chest for each time that we were distracted when our child was speaking to us, when a parent called and we were curt, or when we rushed through a stopping chat on the street with an enthused friend because we wanted to get our coffee a minute earlier. The choice that we need to embrace is not to be distracted by the promise, by the idea of a new version of ourselves standing just outside of Ne'ila's gates. That's the tshuva of gurus, the tshuva of isolation, of stepping outside of this world. The high holidays are not an infomercial that aims to deliver the impossible, the diet of your dreams. But rather, the high holidays come to challenge us to firmly take hold of the possible. The tshuva that we need to embrace is that next year we will strike our chest for fewer things, that we'll be more present, that we'll put the phone down, we'll leave our office earlier, be more measured in our words and tone with that loved one that we have little patience for. Focus on that. Hear those decisions coming out of the shofar tomorrow night. Feel those choices as you thumb through the pages of our tradition's best guesses at how to achieve that better, fuller formed version of yourself. I want you to do something. I want you to pick one thing and do that one thing better. Choose one thing that's attainable and then write that down. Not to go to bed angry. Write that email and then leave it in drafts and pick up the phone. Forgive yourself and move forward. Gossip one less time a day. You have space in the back of your Guide to Road Tzedek books with writing prompts. I'm being serious. I really mean it. Write it down. You don't have to do it right now, but write it down. The one thing that you can work on. The one thing that you will be more aware of. It won't be real unless you really do it. You're not going to get this right every day or every time, but you will notice when you fail. That awareness, being thoughtful and present in your own life, is almost as important as making the right choice, because without that awareness, the right choice will never reveal itself. Do not allow perfect to be the enemy of the good. Forget the before and after picture and embrace the messier picture in the middle. So let me close with the proverbial Hasidic story. It's a story of a rabbi speaking to his students. He says to them, "When I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. But I found that the world is a big place, and changing it was too difficult. So I decided to focus on changing my country. But the country is also a big place. So I decided to focus on my city. But not everyone in this town sees me as their rabbi. So as I got older, I decided to try and change my family. But I discovered that they know me too well, and I could not change them. So I decided to change myself." And that's how I've always heard that story. And I've always liked it, but it's always left me grasping for a little bit more. But I recently learned that it's actually not a Hasidic story. It actually comes from the Litvak tradition. Yes. And it has a second part, which goes like this. "I've come to discover that if long ago I had started with myself, then I could have impacted my family. Then I could have made a difference in my town, improving my country. And that, had I started with myself, looking to improve parts of who I am, that is how I could have changed the world." The real path towards changing the world is done by improving ourselves. And we do that by seizing upon what we can change. By telling your spouse, we have to talk. We can't go to bed angry. Telling a client, I have to be with my family. By understanding that nothing gets better simply because you want it to be. We change the world by noticing it, by fully living within the blessing of it and the promise that we can be better. We change the world by being menches, by being better today than we were yesterday. So let us spend this year by making that vow, that we will start with ourselves, that we'll find the words for the blessing that only we know, that only we can say, and that we will do the work that can only be done by ourselves. And next year at this time, we will strike our chest for fewer things, and the world will be a better place. So Shana Tova, may we all be inscribed in the book of life for a year of health, good choices, and change. Shana Tova.